Hello, everybody, and welcome to the CX Podcast R&R with my good self, Richard Knight, and
my better self, Ryan Huxtable. See what I did there?
I see what you did. I see what you did. Yeah. Whatever. We've so we're back warbling again on this next episode, and we've actually got an interview with a guest, Tom Hadley from SUFU. Which is a branding consultancy or brand consultancy. Tom will tell us more about it when we speak to him. So we're going to spend a few moments today listening to Tom, hearing what he's got to say, and then we will be back. Or will we be back? I don't know. Will we be back? We're just going to be back after this little chat here. So we'll see you on the other side. Tom Hadley, I'll just go straight over to you and say, please introduce yourself to our listeners. Who are you? What do you do? And why are you on this podcast?
Thank you, Rich. Well, it's lovely to be here. Thank you very much for inviting me on. And hello, everybody who's listening in. My business is called SUFU, and I make people persuasive. That is the fundamental that I base my business around. In more descriptive terms, I work within branding, but I'm not a designer. I don't do any visual identity stuff. Mm-hmm. My particular focus is on applying brand to behavior, and that's why I was particularly interested when I chatted to you about coming on here, because I see the work that I do within branding as being extremely close to and informative to customer experience. Mm-hmm. I'm very keen. It's probably my central mission in a way, is to make brand be part of our work on customer experience, rather than what I feel happens a great deal, which is that brand is this sort of monolithic facade that we plonk on top of our business.
Yeah. And
then many businesses, and perhaps many of your listeners this will resonate with them, is that you have an identity created, and then you think, well, other than a better visual look and feel, what did it do for us?
Yeah.
And I think what I'd like to explain a little bit today is how I think that can be changed, because I think it requires us to look at branding from a different perspective than the one which is currently put out there by a lot of brand agencies as the way to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. Fantastic. That from our point of view, Insight 6, I think that fits in fantastically well. This idea that brands and that identity piece is something that's created by an organization, but very rarely actually reflects who the customers are, or what the customers want, or the experience that they actually get. I like that logo. I like the idea of my brand. Isn't it great? It's me. Yeah, but who are your customers? How is that going to impact the way they think and feel about your organization? So that's really interesting. And you mentioned that sort of behavioral piece, which I'm really interested to get into a little bit more detail about, because we often think about an experience and it's, you have a review and it's, the brand was great, I had a great experience, or I didn't, so I'm going to moan about it. But how is that going to impact our customers' behavior going forward? It'd be really interesting to hear a little bit more from your point of view around that behavioral piece. Getting a bit deep now.
Well, no. I mean, this is the problem: is if you talk to me, it ends up being a deep conversation. That's kind of inherent in what I do. Well, let me give you a very quick snapshot of what I think has happened, mm-hmm. which is that if you think about how most people will recognize the approach to branding, it's one where you create values. Often it involves some kind of archetype of customers, and it ends up with an identity. It's very much a top-down approach. Mm-hmm. And it's really based largely on, if you take it right back, it actually comes from the work that Carl Jung did, the famous psychoanalyst in the 1940s, his work on the collective unconsciousness. And So, even the archetypes that are used today in branding are still the most often or variations of the ones that Jung himself developed. The problem that I see is that this very much top-down approach is too simplistic for the modern digital internet-driven age. And more recently, you've got the work of people like Daniel Kahneman looking at behavioral economics. I've done a lot of reading of all of these things, and it started to make sense to me. And I suppose the interesting thing is I'm 48 years old. I grew up without the internet. But the internet went mainstream just as I began my career in the mid to late 90s. So I've grown up without the internet, but I've worked my entire life with it, and I've worked in digital marketing and agency land and advertising and performance marketing for all of those years. And so what I've kind of seen is how it feels to me that those old ways just don't work as well as they used to anymore. And that's also allied with the fact that in general, in marketing at the moment, we are incredibly performance driven. If you think about how most of your listeners out there are marketing in terms of strategy, a great deal of it will be logical marketing, logical forms, whether it's PPC or SEO or email or whatever the tactics are. It's very numbers driven. It's very logical. And I am certainly, as well as people like Kahneman, I think one of the foundational things that I read a few years ago was Rory Sutherland's book Alchemy. Rory Sutherland is the vice chairman of Ogilvy, and he knows a thing or two about advertising. And he in that Alchemy book, he talks a great deal about the psychological and how you can actually use a lot of things that can't be determined in numbers and logic and performance marketing to make enormous impacts. And really, I think all of these things came together in my mind to think, my God, there's a whole nother area that anybody who's struggling with brand or struggling to get the results out of performance marketing or struggling to get this to actually apply to the customer experience, there's a whole world to explore out there, which is very, very new. And a lot of it is kind of trapped at the academic level, I think, still. Yeah. So I thought, well, do you know what? This needs practitioners.
Great.
This needs marketing people who understand this stuff to take it and show people how they can actually do something with it. That is my mission.
Excellent. It sounds fantastically in line, in tune with, from that customer experience point of view, around that emotive and the emotional connection piece. Because, from our point of view, as our listeners know, we mentioned it in numerous times, it is about an emotional connection that drives a memory. Emotion is so important because then we remember something. Was it good or was it not so good? And that affects our behavior beyond that point. So therefore, if I go out, actually, interestingly enough, had a great example when we were in Canada last week, seeing our son, as I mentioned to you prior to clicking the record button, around two different restaurants. One very highbrow Italian restaurant. You walked in, it was all leather sofas, it was dimmed lighting, it was very, very sort of high end. You would think that's what the brand was looking for, that's how it felt. And the people on the desk were okay, they were quite nice. It was like, how can we help you, so on and so forth. But then we got to the server stage, and it was almost like there was a bad smell under a nose. I'll bring you 2 bottles of water. Well, no, we only want 1, thanks. Well, you'll need 2 for, well, no, we just want the 1. So that immediately I'm recollecting that and I'm giving that recollection out. Now, it may well have been quite different, but my emotional connection to that was straight away was, hang on a second. And that made a real difference to me. We went into another restaurant, Earl's restaurant, I think it was called. TV screens, much louder, but the server was absolutely fantastic. Guy called Connor. Couldn't help out enough. I mean, he had a big section. He was running around all over the place. He stopped. He had a chat, a bit of a laugh. He didn't assume anything. He asked us questions. And my emotional connection to that was we went away. It was lovely. We booked to go another night.
Well, let's. I'm going to pick up on that point because you've stumbled on something very interesting. And funny enough, I was thinking about restaurants the other day, and one of Daniel Kahneman's famous theories is something called peak end effect. And if you think about the restaurant experience, what happens in 99.9% of restaurants is that you get asked multiple times, is everything okay? And if you think about that for a minute, you just stop and consider that for one moment, is everything okay? Is the totality of the situation average? It's a terrible thing to ask.
It is,
actually. But people do it, and we do it out of just pure rote, reflex. Whereas what Kahneman would say is, there is always something. What you described when you just mentioned that was peak end effect. There was something about that experience where, at its most intense moment, that is what sears into your memory. So whether that's everything was lovely until the server, dropped the food, or until they wouldn't do what it was, they wouldn't give me the one bottle of water I wanted, and that's the thing that remains in your mind. And it's those sorts of things that taking that sort of behavioral approach, actually, when you get into it with businesses, you can start to use data, and you can use all sorts of tools for actually analyzing what are those moments, and actually asking customers, saying, wouldn't it be great if somebody, rather than just saying, is everything okay throughout, if your server came to you at the end and said, I hope you enjoyed your meal, what was the best bit? And that's it's a harder thing to sort of gather that information, but if you put the work in, somebody might, the things that customers will tell you while it's fresh in their mind. And say it's a difficult one because sometimes people, often in restaurants, we don't want to say, and that's the thing. In general, we're terrible with feedback at restaurants. But actually, even if you just go through the reviews, the peak end effect is probably more apparent there. You see it in everything. You see it in restaurants. You see it in hotel reviews. Classic. You go read any TripAdvisor review, and what you'll see is people say, oh, well, it was a lovely holiday, 13 hours, 14 days, lovely. But there was this one thing where they wouldn't do what I wanted this, and they wouldn't do it. And then 90% of the review is written around that one thing. That's peak end effect. That's perhaps how people's brains work. So the thing is that a lot of people think that marketing is guesswork. And it really isn't. Once you apply behavioral science, you realize there is science behind this stuff. It isn't, you don't have to guess at this stuff. If you know how people's brains fundamentally work, you can start to look for the right triggers and where there is commonality in response, and what that is actually teaching you about how to change the experience.
Yeah, absolutely. So with that in mind, for our listeners, are there certain things, I mean, across all sectors as well, so we get everybody listening to the podcast, it's not just the retail side. I think we often talk about it because it's one of the things that we reflect on quite a lot of the time, but even for professional services, for B2B organizations, what are the sort of things then, when we talk marketing, it's like when we talk customer experience, a lot of people go, what is it then? What actually is it? Apart from advertising online, doing some SEO stuff. So from that brand psychology point of view, what would you suggest, or are there any tips that we can provide to our listeners that would be of use just to get them thinking?
I think it is. I think it's about. I talk to clients a lot about things like the less logical things, not so much about about money and numbers and finance, but about things like time. Time is such an enormous factor. That's timing in terms of speed. It's timing in terms of frequency. All of these things. And so let me give you an example. I mean, we all know a little bit more about behavioral science than we think we do. For example, most of your listeners will probably at some point in time, whoever they are, have thought about discounting and probably time limiting an offer. Well, then there's two common behavioral biases that you know about. One is loss aversion
Mm-hmm.
and the other is scarcity effect.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, a lot of this stuff is buried in a hell of a lot of terminology, and I think we can help demystify it here. So if you've done a 20% 1 week special offer on something, then you've employed those biases.
Yeah.
Where things get interesting is thinking, well, how can we apply some of those sorts of things in other ways that aren't just around price and money?
Okay.
And just as an example, again, this is kind of travel related again. Have you noticed if you go on booking.com or Airbnb or places like that, you will often get pop-ups on web pages that say 8 people viewed this in the last hour.
Yeah.
Now, that's quite an overt attempt at psychological manipulation. We're all kind of getting a little bit, I think it's interesting to actually just check ourselves as we see these things and feel about how we react, and whether our reaction, if you stop and think about it, you actually go, oh, yeah, nice try.
Yeah.
But actually, if we're caught up in the moment of finding something compelling about this, we don't focus on that fact, but we do feel that sense of urgency of, I need to go book. I need to go talk to my wife and book this now, because for some reason I'm suddenly feeling a bit antsy as to whether I really, really like this and I want it, and I might miss out on it. And so I think there's all those sorts of things. I think in terms of scarcity of things, social proof is another huge area, which most people will know. The classic example of social proof is 8 out of 10 cat owners prefer whiskers. That's not new. That's been around forever since probably the 80s. But that was a very early attempt at putting social proof into advertising. But nowadays, with the internet the way it is, social proof, the possibilities of using social proof are huge. And they also allow us to bring in lots of other things. So there's a thing called choice supportive bias.
Oh, that sounds exciting.
Which is where effectively, once you get people to a point in a process where you think they are feeling positive, you ask them to reinforce that positive feeling by taking an action. And the strange thing is by taking the action, it actually embeds it much harder into people's brains. So again, it's looking for those things. These are the things, if you look at it from behavioral approach, you can start to really dig into everything, people's sales and marketing processes, all their operations and their actual customer processes, and saying, where's the opportunity and what could be inserted right there to make that point much more memorable, and have much more of an impact on how people then, take away the experience and how they feel about it and what they do with it afterwards.
Absolutely. And it's a really interesting one, actually, an interesting point about the internet and the importance of that, because there's a lot of different sectors are traditionally, we need to be seen to have those reviews, 8 out of 10 people prefer us, et cetera, because we're, customer facing, we're selling direct to a consumer, et cetera. And actually, as we know from a lot of data that's around there, is that B2B focus really needs to be around that as well. Because if I am thinking about in my organization going to spend some money on a supplier who's going to, help me get even better in my organization, guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to look for that social proof. I want to know that what you're doing is making a difference to people. I'm not just going to go, okay, well, so-and-so referred you, so I'll use you. And interesting the way, and you've probably got, some thoughts around that as well. The younger generation are now seeing online reviews as important as somebody saying to them, oh, use this person.
Absolutely.
And so therefore, if that's part of a full experience, then people are more comfortable and have that emotional connection to say, actually, do you know what? Yeah, I like this organization. I haven't interacted with them yet. That's a really interesting piece. It's that distance that we have from any organization these days. We can sit and look at an organization from afar for quite a while, and we're starting to make those decisions, aren't we, around, is this the sort of organization I want to be involved in? You know, if I'm looking for partnerships, is this the right sort of thing? I'm hearing stuff from people, but what am I seeing? What am I feeling? What does the brand say to me? So,
well, take an interesting, here's just an interesting one from a top level brand, from a big brand. Look at John Lewis.
Mm-hmm.
John Lewis had a strapline for years which was never knowingly undersold.
Mm-hmm.
And if you think about that line for a minute, it's very large. It's never knowingly. It's very personal. It says we will never knowingly undersell to you.
Yeah.
And they changed it fairly recently to for all life's moments.
Mm-hmm.
So they flipped it because it's now not about them, because it's not about their moments. It's about your moments. And the moments thing, I saw a Twitter thread the other day, which was very funny. The moments thing has been very much overdone in advertising in the last few years. If you stop to look, if I see that in your mind now, moments, you will start seeing it everywhere.
Right.
And it has been a bit done to death, but there's a reason it's been done to death, and it's to do with this idea of time and frequency and getting that being a very compelling thing to us these days, to not think about the totality of a brand, but think about the brand in the context of a moment.
Yeah.
When do I need this brand? What am I thinking about at that moment? And that moment I make that association with that brand.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And so again, you know, all of these things should be informing how we're thinking about marketing. I mean, it's talking about a moment. Actually, I've got another one for you.
Yeah.
And this is good. This actually just happened yesterday, and it's much closer to B2B and professional services. So I've worked in marketing for many years. I was a client services director, and I was the person who presented work to clients. Now, if you think about creative agency, so anybody, designers, web developers, anybody who does any sort of creative work, the most important moment in that process is when you actually show the creative to the client for the first time. Mm-hmm. Because certainly in terms of web development, you start off the process with a lot of planning and site maps and wireframes and all these things. And I can tell you from years of experience, clients don't really understand that stuff. They nod their head and go, "Yes, that looks lovely," and they don't really get it. And then when you color it in, then they get it.
Yeah.
And something really, really important happens at that crucial moment, I have found, which is either things go really, really well from there on in, or you find yourself going back to the beginning of the process, because all of a sudden, even though you've done the site mapping and the wireframing and all of that kind of process stuff, people will suddenly go, "Oh, well, I don't like this. And why have we got that page?" And I don't think, I've been in the room a million times when people have gone, whoa, hang on a minute. This is site mapping stuff. You already signed that off.
Yeah.
But the point is that is how the client responds to the presentation of that creative fundamentally impacts how their kind of confidence level about whether they want to now drive forward into that looks amazing. I love it. I feel, I'm getting all the right feelings. Let's get it built and get it done. Yeah. Or whether they suddenly stop and take stock and all sorts of doubts and worries creep in, and then they want to go backwards in the process. It's very rarely is that a neutral moment. Yeah. If you analyze a lot of projects. So, again, that's kind of a peak end effect thing that if you think about that, I say to agencies, how do you actually present your creative? And the reason I was thinking about it yesterday was because I'm currently working with a designer on a web project for someone, and they just sent me a bunch of JPEGs of the designs, and they were like, "Shall I send these over to the client?" And I went, "Whoa, no, not like that. I want these beautifully presented. I want this client's that moment of reaction to be really, really positive." And the designer sort of looked at me and was like, "Well, they'll get it, won't they?" And I went, no. This is important. This is an important moment in the process. How we handle this dictates how the rest of this goes. And that, that it's literally down to how profitable this project is going to be with us. Because I can tell you now, if we fluff this moment, we're probably going to spend 10 extra hours in meetings and talk and all that stuff. So it really, these moments aren't just there. They're not just nice to have. They have real measurable impact on both, how on the customer and also on the bottom line for us as the suppliers.
I think it's a fantastic point around that, the commerciality of what we're talking about here, of that behavioral piece. As soon as people saying, psychology, what are you talking about? We're in business. Come on, we're here to make money. But the impact is massive. You think about buying patterns and the way people interact with you. Some people are all about the wording, or some people are all about the visuals. Some people want to feel, you can see it when people go into a shop. There are lots of people who pick up the product and will tactile. They will feel it. If you put everything behind glass and somebody's very tactile, you are missing out on that emotional moment, that wow piece that we talk about a lot from a customer experience point of view. Those wow moments. When is that bit that somebody went, God, that is amazing?
And delighting people, surprising people.
Yeah.
If I've got time, I'll give you one more example. I've got a client who are essentially they're a paramedic company.
Mm-hmm.
They do medical cover for events. So if you go to Glastonbury Festival or anything, you'll see effectively kind of St John's Ambulance kind of organization. And one of the absolute revelations that's come out of my work with them is that most of their competitors are basing their brand and their marketing around the day of the event and how good they are on the day. So there's not a lot of room to really differentiate there. So I was talking to my client about other things, and she said to me, do you know, one of the things that doesn't get talked about enough is what happens after the event. And I said, oh, why is that important? And she said, well, if you run events, if you're a professional event organizer, every year you have to submit a SAG plan to the local authority for your next event. And one of the criteria upon which that plan will be judged is how good you were at dealing with medical stuff. But key thing, they want to know whether you are a negative impact upon local NHS health provision. Example, if you're going to run an event and 10,000 people are going to turn up, are you going to flood the local A&E with a zillion people over a 3-day period while your festival is on, or your car show, or your country show, or whatever it is? And that's the stuff. And she said, what we do is we make sure that we capture a lot of data about the day, give it to the client after the event, and help them with the SAG plan for the following year, which makes their licensing for the next year that much more easy to get. And I was like, that's it. That's the thing. That's the thing that I've been looking for. There is something of enormous value that, it can be used. I can take that practical thing, that behavior. I can see the enormous value. I can work that all the way back to brand.
Yeah. And
effectively, and all of the messaging and all of the values that I can create around that are an enormous USP, an enormous differentiator.
Yeah.
But I would never have got there by starting from that top-down approach of creating an identity. I had to go the other way. I had to dig into the detail, find a behavior that had enormously, deep resonance, and then work it back the other way.
It's great, isn't it? It's that example of that walking again. It's old wording, but walking in the customer's shoes. What is it that the people that are coming to event, who are buying your product, who are using your services, how are they feeling? What is it that they're looking for? Because if we start there, like with customer experience, with branding, then we can work our way back exactly as you just said. And it's as important and detailed as what words do you use on an email? From our point of view, how do you ask for feedback?
Yeah.
But also,
the truth is, and I know this is sometimes a difficult one to hear, is that we want to get feedback, but people can't tell us the truth. People do not say what they mean, and they do not act as they tell us they will. So we've got to go beyond that. If you just sit there and go, our clients say all these nice things about us, so that's all great. You can't rely on that.
Yeah.
If what they're doing says different, and if what they're doing says different, then you've got to get into the question of what's driving that behavior and why aren't they telling us the truth.
And what a fantastic place to end our discussion today. That's a great thing to throw out there. So all our listeners and viewers there, yeah, what are you doing to really get down into that? Because that can drive your brand, you can drive your experiences that your customers ultimately have as well. So that's fantastic. Tom, thank you very much for your time today. Just before we go, how can our listeners and viewers get in contact with you if they want to talk more about branding and what you can do and help out and all of that stuff? How can they, what's the best way of getting in contact?
I am active. I'm pretty active on both LinkedIn and Twitter. So it's at SUFU Marketing on Twitter, or you can look me up, Tom Hadley, and SUFU Marketing on LinkedIn. I'm always happy to have chats with people. I love a good one-to-one. So and I just love having these sort of chats about ideas and different things.
Fantastic. It's been an absolute pleasure. And thank you very much for coming on, and we will see you again soon. Thanks very much.
Thanks so much, Rich.
Some cracking points there that actually I'm sure a lot of our listeners are probably thinking, oh, Richard and Ryan have spoken about certain aspects of that already. And yes, indeed. Hence the reason why we had Tom on, really, just to give us a bit of backup, if you like, to make sure that what we're saying actually does make sense from another point of view, from that marketing and brand point of view. So what were your sort of take homes there, Ryan, or you think that our listeners would benefit from hearing again?
Yeah, do you know what, Rich? There was firstly, what a lovely guy, and a big thanks to Tom for giving us his time, because often we warbly on, don't we? And it's nice to get a different perspective, and as you say, give us some backup to what we're saying from another professional. But what I really took from that was the three key things, really. The first one was that really stood out for me was about making the customer experience part of your brand. So not sitting and devising, we think a brand would look great because this is what we think. He talked at length, didn't he, about making the brand part of your customer experience and really living and breathing those brand values.
That's quite, sorry to interrupt, mate. That's really quite interesting, just in terms of where we come from, in terms of that, the customer experience side of things, and what is it you want your customers to say, think, and feel about your organization. That's the first thing you've got to think about. It's the same from the branding point of view, isn't it?
Yeah, you're right. And just building on that point, he talked, didn't he, about making the people interaction in your brand, this personalized, the way your brand shows up being really personalized and really one-to-one with your customers, which I thought was really strong. That was kind of the second thing that came across in terms of how do you get your people to apply those brand behaviors. And then the third thing that I thought was really interesting, we talked about how does your brand affect your customer behaviors? And I think that's a great question. And probably one of the takeaways from today's podcast is, how does your brand affect your customer behaviors? Does it endear them to advocate for you, sharing what you do? Does it put them off your brand? Does it engage them to seek further assistance from your brand? And the other thing it put me in mind of was we ran something called Legal CX back down here in October, and we were working with a branding agency, PR agency called Kyson PR, and Claire Rodway, who's the managing director of Kyson, talks lots about the promises you make in your brand. Do they really show up in your client experience? And listening to Tom there, it really resonated with me in terms of this is quite simple stuff, but you know what? It's simple, but it's not easy because you've got to get everyone on that journey, understand your brand. So, great point. I thought a great conversation.
Yeah, fantastic. I think that everybody on your journey piece, fantastic place to leave us this week for this episode. There's no point in doing any of this stuff if there's one or two people who are bought in. They really got to get buy-in from the entire organization to really want to be able to deliver these things. and understand and know that it is going to make a difference for your customers, which at the end of the day will make a difference for your business. So that is us. Here endeth the lesson. Sounds like we've been preaching. Here endeth the lesson. We'll be back for episode 67. Blimey, there's too many of them. In April. So we will see you then. I've been Richard Knight.
And Ryan Huxtable, and a big thanks to Tom. Remember, like, share, and comment. And we look forward to seeing you in April.